Welcome, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today. I'm going to hand over to Lorren now to take it away.
Thank you, everyone, for attending today to hear more about our project on extended producer responsibility for plastic packaging specifically in South Africa. And the title slide that you see in front of you is of informal reclaimers or waste pickers on a landfill in one of the municipalities in South Africa. And just to say that these people are very valuable, you know, in collecting recyclables and to really drive a circular economy in South Africa. And it's good to know at this stage that the integration guidelines for municipalities have been approved, they have been published, and there's really great progress in that space, which is very beneficial for EPR in this country going forward. Okay, so moving on. Just some information on the project partners. WWF is South Africa is the project lead, and we have project partners, the Department of Environment, Forestry and Fisheries and IUCN. So just something about WWF, we're an NGO with strategic initiatives where we feel that there's a great need to restore balance, reduce impact and protect our country's vital resources and natural biodiversity. And by ensuring the healthy functioning of these natural systems and the species and communities are an integral part of them, we can help restore and reinforce our planet's natural defenses. Just to be clear, we are a science-based organization, and we also work in the various spaces or landscapes that you see there listed on the screen. IUCN, or the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, it has over 1,400 member organizations and thousands of experts globally. They also work across a wide range of themes related to conservation, environmental and ecological issues, and specifically their MAR Plastics program, which stands for Marine Plastics and Coastal Communities, which falls under the Close the Plastics Tap program, is a 3-year initiative in Africa and Asia, working in 5 countries, and South Africa is one of those countries. Very important project partners, as they have done a lot of work in South Africa in the plastics, working in the plastics theme. Just some information of what our approach is, what WWF's approach is to plastics and plastics pollution. The overarching program is called No Plastics in Nature. And we work within 3 pillars, as you can see there on the screen. These points of leverage, I'll start first with the business model innovation. So we support collective action to shift market practices because we need to reduce virgin plastic consumption in order to move towards circularity for plastic products, packaging. And this is done through product redesign, manufacturing innovation, in order so that new product delivery and circular business models can be brought to light and can be implemented at scale. Moving on to the policy, we also support the development and implementation of effective national and regional policy and regulations that align with circular economy principles. And you'll see then the second bullet point, extended producer responsibility is extremely important in this pillar. And also very importantly, we are advocating for a new global treaty to address plastic pollution at the UN level. I'm not sure if everyone has heard, but I know that many African countries have pledged their support to this national treaty, and there's growing momentum around setting up this platform at the UN. Moving on to plastic smart cities, even though we have a systemic and life cycle approach to the problem, we also acknowledge that intervention at end of life is also required, and this is where we develop plastic smart cities framework together with pilot projects which can then be scaled up based on the local context. Just very important that all these interventions and pillars that I've talked about fit into an overarching framework which takes into account every life cycle stage. So we cannot put in place a systems change if we don't work with every single stage in the life cycle of plastics. So moving on to EPR. What is EPR? It is a policy approach, specifically environmental policy approach. that extends the producer or obliged company's responsibility beyond the product use to end of life, which means that this includes financial support or operational support for the various end of life activities which are listed there on the slide. How we know it in this country is that once the product, which is usually in a packaging, leaves the store or leaves the distribution center, then it is the government or the consumer's responsibility to, manage it at end of life, pay for end of life activities. So EPR extends that responsibility so that the producer is also responsible for these activities. Just important to note that extended producer responsibility as a policy instrument, and you'll see it's grouped there on the slide by regulatory-based approaches, is only one of a suite of policy instruments that are required to move to a circular economy. You'll find other instruments such as economic instruments, such as taxes, subsidies, etc., that will need to also be put in place to support, the successful implementation of EPR policy. And at the bottom of the slide, you'll see information-based instruments, also very important. And in South Africa, this source is from the OECD, but in the South African context, we have the Design for Recycling guidelines for packaging that support the EPR policy, as well as the on-pack recycling labels that are being developed under the South African Plastics Pact, so that consumers know what to do with their packaging once they have finished with it or post-use. And then, of course, to the left-hand side, voluntary approaches, also very important to support the overall goals of EPR. We have a voluntary commitment in South Africa at the moment called the South African Plastics Pact, which has members across the value chain, which, who come together to try and find solutions and commit to time-bound targets to support the transition to a circular economy for plastics in South Africa. So all in all, EPR is not a silver bullet that will fix everything. We need a suite of policy instruments as well as voluntary approaches in order to reach the goal where we need to be. Okay, and then moving on. Just the goals of EPR in brief. It is a three-pronged approach. So firstly, there is a focus on upstream interventions with regards to eco-design, design for reuse, recyclability. Secondly, a focus on end of pipe or management of that priority material or waste stream post-use. And in this way, EPR schemes can help to address issues related to resource consumption and growing waste generation. Also very important in the context of South Africa that this scheme also creates opportunities and supports the economic growth of the waste sector through the much needed investment, which will then create jobs. And we all know that jobs in the South African context is very important for government for a while now. The benefits of EPR, it's not just environment, it stretches in quite a few areas. It stretches beyond environment to economic and social benefits. Environmental benefits are self-explanatory. By focusing on properly managing materials at end of life and also incentivizing better design upstream, a lot of the environmental impacts that we're seeing from plastic pollution, from the leakage of plastics into the environment can be addressed. But in addition to this, the economic benefits listed there. Indirect benefits with regards to the economy is also relief to other sectors that are negatively impacted by plastic waste. And if you look at the various research out there by the UN, by our local office as well, is that the fishing industry is being affected by plastic pollution. Tourism is being affected. So it's not just directly for the waste sector or in the plastic sector, it stretches beyond to other sectors as well. And then from a social perspective, we have informal sector integration there, but also very important, the health benefits, the health risks associated with mismanaged waste, contaminated recyclables, etc. that also can be addressed through this very effective policy mechanism. And then basic principles of EPR. We currently have a voluntary EPR scheme in the country at the moment. But moving on to mandatory EPR, this definitely shifts the system significantly. And an important factor here, especially for South Africa, is the issue of free riders. In the voluntary EPR that we currently have, there is limited scope and coverage due to membership of a EPR scheme not being mandatory. And with the obliged company's responsibility now extending to the end of life of products, the fees paid will be used to finance improved collection, sorting, and recycling of these waste streams. So, this is crucial for South Africa with our dwindling landfill space. And the government has a very strong position on transforming this sector. And it's also stated many policy strategies and white papers, because we need to move away from landfilling. We need to create more value in the system. We need to divert materials, create more opportunities, which will ultimately lead to a more circular economy. Some basic principles of EPR. You can have an individual producer responsibility scheme, or you can have a collective. A collective responsibility is basically having a producer responsibility organization available there. So producers or obliged companies are members of this producer responsibility organization. And it's also, I think it's more powerful, and well, it is found in our research that we've done from case studies in different countries developed and developing, that it is more powerful if producers collectively have membership or join a PRO. You can pool resources, the logistical challenges can be addressed. And the transparency and accountability should be there, definitely. But definitely, collective responsibility has been shown to be more effective with what we've seen in our research in other countries. And currently, yes, there are PROs that have been set up for some material streams in plastics, paper, metals, etc. in this country. Which are, they have made a difference in the recycling rates up until now. Then from studies all over the world with regards to financial flows, irrespective of country or context, it is clear that waste management needs to be financed. The cost to public resources is significant and becoming more and more expensive. The default that waste is simply just sent to landfills when collected by the public authority, because it's the cheapest waste treatment, it's just not sustainable. And, collection on its own is costly, and even more so sorting and then recycling. So we know that major infrastructure investment is required going forward. And the management of these financial flows is important for the success of an EPR scheme being implemented. The tasks required by the PROs, they'll need to manage the revenues as well as the expenditures of an EPR scheme. You can see there are quite a few activities that need to be covered. And what is done with those expenditures is very similar to what the current PROs are doing with that, except for there is a slight difference where the revenues that will be used according to the latest version of the regulation is that costs for collection, sorting, and recycling will need to be covered. And this isn't currently the case in South Africa, but if you look at what is happening in other countries, developing, it is crucial that these fees are used for these activities in order to increase the rates of recycling and to get the material back into the system. This is a slide which David Drew presented at a PETCO webinar last year, and I thought it was very useful just to explain how EPR fees are currently used in the PETCO model. just to note that, the amount of financial support or subsidization required would be more than in our current EPR scheme, which I'm going to talk to now, in order to reach high levels of recycling. This current method is based on the PEPCO, how they subsidize their PET beverage bottles. So you'll see that there's a navy blue line in the middle, and that sort of separates the costs to recover, sort, recycle the PET. And then on the right-hand side is, what the market price is for this PET when it's sold by the recyclers, to go into other products such as fiber or bottle to bottle, etc. And you'll see there are significant costs on the left-hand side. There has to be a value in the material for it to be collected, number one, by the informal reclaimers or by formal waste management companies. And then there's also many processing costs. I mean, labor, electricity, water, facilities, etc. And also the investment in infrastructure, machinery. So all of those costs need to be taken into consideration. So that's when EPR fee comes into it. What they're calling there's mind the gap, is that where a gap exists, that's where the EPR fees close it currently. And this fee that is paid trickles then down into the value chain, so to create more value in the system in order to keep this system rolling over. Just to note there that every material is different. So some materials like aluminium have a very high value, inherently high value, and they might not need so much EPR support going forward. In the situation that we're in now in South Africa, whilst other materials don't have any commercial value and might need more. In those cases where there's no infrastructure collection systems in place for those materials, investment from scratch will need to be made. And then just to talk about packaging, it's very important to define what materials and formats are covered when it comes to packaging. In most countries, the EPR system solely comprises household packaging, as you can see there, and equivalent places of origin, for example, restaurants, offices, canteens. Other packaging from other places of origin can be excluded or included, depending on the provisions in the regulation. Currently, our current EPR regulations talks about paper and packaging, and it's quite detailed in defining what packaging is covered in the current regulation. Around stakeholder roles and responsibilities, there needs to be an interface for determining how much that needs to be paid into the scheme. So in order to have a level playing field, you need to have all producers and importers paying this fee and participating in the EPR scheme. This is to ensure no double payment. So, it's crucial to determine where this interface is, so it can be clearly determined where and how much packaging is actually introduced onto the market for consumption. And a clear interface is the point at which the companies bring goods to the market of a country where the EPR law applies. These goods are used and eventually disposed of in this country. So the obliged companies or producers would be the importers of the products that are already packaged. Fillers, for example, they fill packaging here in the country and place on the market, brand owners and retailers. You'll see at the bottom there's service packaging. So service packaging is directly filled when selling, and the interface for this type of packaging is the company which sells the empty service packaging to retailers, street food outlets, etc. But again, it's very important to define that interface so that you don't have, again, the free rider situation that we have in this country at the moment. Data, very, very important. I know currently in our engagements with various stakeholders in the plastics value chain, there is a very big problem with credible, transparent data. We have the South African Waste Information System, and there are a lot of questions around the accuracy of that system. And I think moving forward, it would be important for when more and more members start joining PROs with the mandatory EPR, for there to be a register. And I mean, the PROs would be responsible either, or an independent party would be responsible for these registers, as well as, the financial flows. Very important. What happens to that? It needs to be audited, etc. So we have a very incomplete view of the current material flows of plastic packaging in this country at the moment. So moving forward, we will need more data to become available and data repositories to be set up to meet the need. The EPR mechanism is traditionally seen as more downstream mechanism that would either financially or operationally support end-of-life activities. However, you can adjust those fees, or they call it modulation of fees, to also incentivize product redesign upstream. And of course, if products are designed to be circular, for example, they are designed to be recycled in practice, they're designed to be reusable, then obviously the downstream activities would not be that expensive. I mean, if a piece of packaging cannot be recycled, it would go to landfill, and hopefully there would be incentives or disincentives in place, such as higher landfill fees for these products to disincentivize it. And if a product is recycled or reusable, then a much lower fee, because there is already infrastructure, collection systems in place that can process that packaging. They talk about a bonus or malus in certain countries. I know there are different degrees of modulation based on various aspects. But I think moving forward, we will work with the recyclability of packaging in this country as a basic modulation. Monitoring and reporting targets are very, very important in an EPR scheme, and you'll see that in the current regulation, there are targets for collection of recyclable materials, for output recycling or effective recycling, reuse, as well as recycled content. And if you look how they all work together, you'll see that the top two, and thanks to Kirsten Barnes from the South African Plastics Pact, who also spoke about EPR in one of the webinars, I really liked the way she brought all this together to actually show the circularity of all these targets and how it drives circularity, is that collection and output recycling takes care of the supply side. Reuse is where you have the material staying in the system, and it's a high value loop. And then recycled content looks at the demand. So if there's a demand for recycled content, if there are specifications that plastic packaging needs to have a certain amount or level of recycled content, this will again drive the demand. And all in all of these systems and targets need to work together to create this circular material flow. So getting onto our project, we have done, well, WWF International have also done quite a bit of work around extended producer responsibilities. And we believe that EPR have a critical role to play in financing a circular plastics economy by holding producers, accountable for managing their plastic products and packaging at end of life. So we've received quite a bit of support from WWF Germany. They're leading on the global WWF EPR project, and they also support quite a few countries in Southeast Asia, Africa, and South America. It's also good to be able to tap into best practice in these various countries globally through the research and feasibility studies that have already been done, as well as training, and support the implementation of EPR in these countries with regards to business activities as well as government activities. On the right, you'll see a new report listing the 15 basic principles of EPR for packaging. I think it was released late last year. And this provides assistance to governments, the private sector and civil society to develop effective EPR schemes. We've also used a lot of these principles in our project. So our project, which is currently underway, it's coming to an end in April this year. It is funded by the Swedish Environmental Protection Agency and is underpinned by an inclusive process. And this has been done in order to provide inputs into an EPR policy to get the views from everyone that will be involved, that will be participating across the value chain. And through engaging with various experts nationally and internationally, as well as all the actors in the value chain, will also help to increase the institutional and technical capacity, not only for the project partners, but also for the department and the wider stakeholder group. The approach, and this has also been done in order to have more buy-in and support from stakeholders. What we found in many of our engagements is that the knowledge of EPR, the awareness of EPR is really lacking because of the current situation that only a few organizations are participating in the current voluntary EPR scheme. So definitely, you know, creating more awareness, engaging with various stakeholders would ultimately benefit the implementation of a workable solution in the future, and just, you know, create this awareness of what needs to be done going forward. Just a short summary of what we've done so far. So we did a literature review on EPR principles, case studies in various countries, developed and developing countries. We also did interviews with experts, and that the interview analysis has also been included in our project reports. Moving on from there, we held webinars and workshops. So we set up a draft report with policy recommendations, and this was then used as a basis to workshop with the wider stakeholder group. Stakeholders would then provide comments and feedback on an online form, and to ascertain if there's agreement or not, you know, on the policy recommendations that were put forward. And there was also communication, and we also wanted input about challenges that could be faced in the implementation of the current published EPR regulations that were published last November. But I do realize that the consultation process has been extended. And we are due to see the publishing of these the regulation in May. I think those are the new timelines. So yes, I mean, all of these were taken into account in order to develop the workshop. And you'll see that some, moving on to the next slide, there were some, you know, areas of consensus as well as divergence. Based on the feedback, we found that there was less consensus on, you know, the following points, specifically targets, the structure of the PRO, be it a centralized PRO or multiple, roles and responsibilities, and the oversight body. And these topics were extensively workshopped with inputs from various stakeholders. And from there, we would then refine the recommendations and provide more information for how it could practically be implemented. So the workshops were held last year, November. We've already finalized the workshop report, and we are currently busy with finalizing the policy recommendations based on all these inputs, the desktop research, the interview analysis, as well as the workshops. And once the report has been finalized, we will send out to the wider stakeholder group with a survey, also just to gauge for the M&E of this project, you know, has there been increased awareness and understanding of EPR? And also included is just is to work on a potential implementation plan for the EPR regulations coming out, and also just to assist DEF, perhaps as a starting point for the upcoming EPR regulations due to be gazetted in May. And then I just want to talk about the interlinkages to other initiatives out there. I recently attended the UNEA 5 side event looking at addressing single-use plastic products and plastic pollution, with a life cycle approach. And once again, the same recommendations are provided, that a systems change is needed, both with upstream and downstream interventions. And EPR policies are extremely important to be used for the systems change. And in order to support the goals of EPR schemes in various countries, you need to set up credible data repositories, material flows need to be set up in order to monitor progress towards the target. So everything that I've been speaking about was also discussed and came out as recommendations in this webinar. And just a note on using life cycle assessment, the life cycle assessment methodology to determine the environmental performance of plastic packaging specifically. The current EPR regulations, and as far as I know, the mention of the usage of LCAs is still included to be gazetted in May. The study found that reusable alternatives had significantly less environmental impacts than the single-use alternative, irrespective of material use. It's very important just to keep that in mind, with the implementation of the EPR scheme or regulation in this country in future. And then national legislation in various countries will also be guided by the widely supported call for a legally binding agreement at the UN. And I also spoke about that in the slides on where we work in different pillars where we work with regards to plastic pollution. Thank you. Thank you for your attention. I hope that covered everything.
Thank you, Lorren. That was great to hear, and I like the quote you have up there. Please, everyone, feel free to send through your questions in the Q&A box or in the chat. In the meantime, Lorren, you mentioned that in terms of the new EPR scheme, producers of plastic and that will be sending that there are already structures in place for plastic packaging and that to be recycled. If the levels of plastic packaging being sent to recycling increase, as one would hope with the EPR, is there enough capacity in current recycling systems, or will that have to be expanded?
So if you speak to the South African Plastic Recycling Organization and the various PROs, there is current capacity for current materials that are being recycled. I mean, I spoke about a 20% excess capacity the last time I spoke to them. But obviously, with more materials being covered, infrastructure and collection systems will need to be put in place to recycle these new materials. And I mean, that's where the EPR fees come into play. So, I mean, this is a long process. It's not going to happen overnight. And definitely with the producers, through the PROs, working with municipalities, recyclers, collectors on the ground, it'll be important to map out, what current capacities are, what the gaps are, etc. I know, for example, in the PET space, there isn't current capacity. I mean, they're trying to expand the capacity of their recycling at the moment. There is a shortage. But I know in the polyolefin space, there is capacity. So yeah, I mean, it all depends on the material and so on.
Thanks, Lorren. It's great to know that there is such a drive to recycle that current recycling capacity could be expanded. You also mentioned the producer responsibility organizations. Can you comment on how they would be affected with the current change or with the planned changes for the EPR?
The current, yeah. So, I mean, just talking about plastics packaging. So you have the polystyrene, you have the Vinyl Association, Petco, and then Polyco. I think, potentially it could be beneficial for them because, I mean, with EPR becoming mandatory, I mean, their membership base should grow. They would be able to have more funding to financially support the various end-of-life activities. The government would have more an oversight role if you look at the current EPR regulations. Yes, and I mean, much of what they're doing now, the fact that they need to report their progress towards targets, that has already been done. But again, government would have more of a presence in this whole landscape going forward, and PROs would need to be answerable to government and to their members going forward. So some changes, but a lot of that is already happening within these organizations.
Thanks, Lorren. There's some comments in the Q&A box that say thanks for sharing. And then there's a question that says, can you please show the slide on basic principles about obliged companies again?
Okay.
Then there's another question that says, does the EPR approach encourage collaborative and co-production with other small organizations on the ground?
Definitely, if you look at our policy recommendations, as well as what I've seen from the regulations that were published last November, it looks definitely that there's more an inclusive approach, working with the informal sector and with various other stakeholders that are already involved in many of these activities. But yes, I mean, I think with the growing membership base and the inclusion of importers, because up until now, we don't even have data of what is being imported into the country. So getting the importers into the scheme, involving the informal reclaimers, and working also closely with municipalities, in order to collect these material streams and sort and recycle. I definitely think that more and more stakeholders are going to be, there will be more engagement between the various stakeholders in this entire value chain. Yes.
Thank you, Lorren. There's a comment that I think they were referring to a slide before this current one that you're showing now.
That one?
I think we'll have to see. Anne, please let us know if this is the wrong one. Then I was also just wondering, in terms of the management of the EPR funds, would those be managed by the producer responsibility organizations? You mentioned that there were some concerns about the management and an overseeing body. Would that be a government organization, or would that remain with the current producer responsibility organizations?
So in our policy recommendations, the EPR fees, the funds coming into the scheme are industry managed. So yes, if a producer or an obliged company decides to join a PRO as a member, the fees would be paid to the PRO and then would be spent on various activities. The funds would not go to government. In our policy recommendations, we spoke about an oversight body to address more the data and the data transparency. What has been found in many other countries is that the number of organizations that need to sign up are not always taken into account by the PRO. So you need a general overarching body that can look at all registrations of organizations that place packaging on the market. Not that organization would manage any funds coming in, that is still the PRO's responsibility, but it would provide a general oversight and an auditing functionality, and also report to government along with the PRO's reporting to government. So that's where we saw value in this oversight body. It has been seen to be very valuable and provide many benefits in other countries as well. And that's why we put it forward. But yes, there has been some confusion around the responsibility or the mandate of this oversight body.
Thanks, Lauren. There's another question here that says the price of recycled material is market related and goes through highs and lows. What has the international research shown around maintaining a fixed EPR fee to be able to manage the daily or weekly market price fluctuation?
Okay, so if you look at our current voluntary EPR system, it's a free market. So the EPR fees paid, they either provide grants to the recyclers, and then this trickles down in order to create a value for the material to be collected. EPR fees aren't a price fixing mechanism. They are fees that are used to for end-of-life activities. So that it's two different mechanisms. So what we're saying in mandatory EPR, and this is what's been promulgated or gazetted in the current EPR regulations, is that the fees will be used to pay for collection, sorting, recycling, irrespective of the market value of that material. The current voluntary EPR scheme has used the principle of the market value of the material to get it into the system. So if there is a demand for that material and there's infrastructure and collection systems in place, then it will be collected. If a material does not have the recycling infrastructure, there's no demand for it, and I can think of various problematic plastic packaging formats such as multi-layers. I mean, there are no converters currently paying an EPR fee to a PRO for multi-layers, as far as I know. Maybe this could be a recent change that they are actually paying fees to Polyco or become members of Polyco. But even so, there is no recycling infrastructure or collection systems for this material because there's no market value for it, no demand for it. It's also very difficult to recycle. So what the mandatory EPR that we're moving to is saying, irrespective if multi-layer has a value or not, it needs to be collected, sorted, and if it cannot be recycled, then obviously via modulation of the fees, it will attract a much higher EPR fee because sorting systems, recycling systems need to be put in place to process it in the future.
Thanks, Lauren. Then the second part of that question was, how is this balanced with the unwanted products that generally have low value and informal workers, for example, do not prefer to pick up those products? I think you did just allude to that now, but I don't know if you want to comment any more on that.
So for the products that don't have value, for example, I did use an example there. Yes, it's not collected. Many flexible plastic packaging formats are not collected currently because there's no market value for it. But moving forward, because these obliged companies that place their packaging on the market have to take responsibility for it, they'll have to pay for the collection and sorting and recycling irrespective of the value. So yes, they're not being collected now by the informal reclaimers because they have no value, but in future, the informal reclaimers or formal waste management companies will be contracted to collect them and be paid a service fee irrespective of the market value. If that makes it clearer.
Yes, I think it does. And that's wonderful to hear because as far as I know, is number 4 plastic, some of the packaging, that's one of the highest, but one of the most used plastics in South Africa, if I'm not mistaken. Then the third part of the question was, what is the research and recommendations showing on the role of municipalities and the informal sector in the EPR value chain?
Very important. We know that in our current policy landscape, that I think it's in our constitution, that municipalities are responsible for collection of waste. And with this new EPR regulation, it states that the producers are responsible for that waste stream. We must also take into account that policies and regulations evolve. I mean, if you look at climate change, our national regulation had to evolve to accommodate how we're going to reach our nationally determined contributions, etc. So this is an evolving process. Policy does take long to promulgate, to implement, etc. But very important. I mean, the informal waste sector have been responsible for collecting most of the recyclable materials in the economy. And they were even included in the current EPR regulation, that they need to be included in the current EPR scheme. And of course, municipalities, because they are responsible for collection, also need to be engaged with and speaking to their body Salga, definitely they are very keen. They really want to create this enabling environment so they can work with the PRO's producers in order to get their packaging material back into the system.
Thanks, Lorren. Then there's a comment that says, thank you, Lorren, and this is most informative and hopefully will soon reach a wide audience. And thanks for the responses to those that three-part question. I don't see any other questions in the chat so long, but you are welcome to send those through at a later stage to be addressed after this webinar. There is another one that's come through now that says, is there any further clarity in South Africa around responsibility of brand owner versus the actual packaging producer?
It's coming. So there has been consultation between I think, yeah, there was an industry task team that was set up towards the end of last year, and they have been working together with the department. And speaking to the department recently, there has been more clarity around the responsibilities of every stakeholder. So yes, I think we're going to expect when the proposed or the amended regulation comes out for comment, hopefully this month or early next month, that there would be more clarity on the roles of each and every stakeholder, because I know there was some confusion in the original regulation around, is it the converters or the packaging manufacturers, or is it the brand owners, etc. So yeah, I'm sure we'll receive more clarity around that.
Thanks, Lorren. I think that's a very valuable question. I think a lot of the retail shops in South Africa particularly tend to have their own particular brand, but they might not necessarily be the ones actually producing the products. Thank you so much, everyone. If you do have any questions at a later stage, please feel free to email those through to us and we can pass those on to Lorren. Lorren, thank you so much for your time and your expertise today. It's wonderful to hear about all the exciting changes that should be coming to the EPR in South Africa and how that can help us aim towards a more circular economy. Is there anything you'd like to add before we close?
No, not at all. I just want to say I'm not the expert. We received all this information from all the work that we've done, so hopefully we can package it well to just get the message out there and to create more awareness. And yeah, I'm hoping that with the implementation of the mandatory EPR in the next few years, it will be successful. And there'll be lessons learned so we can really move forward on this, as it's a very important instrument to transition to a circular economy.
Thank you so much, Lorren. And thank you everyone for attending. This will be available on our YouTube page within the next week or so. And please join us again next week for the 7th webinar in our series, which will be wrapping up on the 24th of March. Thank you so much, everyone, and thank you again, Lorren. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your Wednesday, and we look forward to seeing you again in our webinars in the future. Thank you.